Promised on day one, repeated over and over when he was running for president, that he would lower costs on day one. Now that he's been sworn in, grocery prices are up, inflation has gone up, and people are worried that Elon Musk and his Doge hackers are messing with their Medicare benefits and Social Security checks. 1 month in, and Donald Trump has done nothing to actually help families, but billionaires, they're doing great. We need people in this administration who are willing to focus on lowering costs for American families. Now, this committee has jurisdiction over the enforcement of consumer financial laws and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We should be having an entire hearing focused on how President Trump and Elon Musk are trying to sideline the CFPB to make it easier to scam and cheat people out of their hard-earned money. Senate Democrats held a forum about this just 2 days ago and the devastating effect that this con will have on families. On February 7th, Mr. Musk woke up and tweeted CFPB RIP. And soon after that, President Trump, Doge, and acting CFPB director Russ Vought shut down the whole operation, sending employees home, stopping enforcement activities, and preventing the agency from doing its job to help consumers. Over the weekend, news broke that CFPB had been told to abandon its headquarters. The president's actions are illegal, and they will do extraordinary damage to hardworking Americans. Since its founding, the CFPB has returned over $21 billion directly to consumers. It's helped service members who've been ripped off by unscrupulous lenders. It's helped borrowers whose student loan servicers treated them unfairly. It's helped families that have been scammed, and it's helped thousands of Americans that have been charged extortionate fees by big banks and other financial service providers. Nobody is helped by shutting down the agency except big banks, con men, and ripoff artists. Oh, and billionaires like Mr. Musk, who is trying to start a new X money feature on his social media platform. By eliminating the CFPB, he would take the financial cop off the beat. Congress created the CFPB, and no one, not Donald Trump, not co-presidents Elon Musk and Donald Trump, no one except Congress can shut it down. But instead of having a hearing on this subject, we have the CFPB director nominee, Mr. McKernan. He will be squeezed in among 4 nominees, and we will have 75 seconds to ask him what he thinks his job will be if he is confirmed as CFPB director, while Trump and Musk try to kill the agency. We will also hear from Mr. Pulte, the nominee for director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA. I've got some real concerns that President Trump's plans for our housing finance system will raise housing costs for American families, and that Mr. Pulte, if confirmed, will be the one to carry out those plans. FHFA oversees Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which helps make sure that families can afford home mortgages. FHFA has helped run these multi-million-dollar companies, but now a group of Trump's billionaire friends are pushing to privatize Fannie and Freddie so they can make billions of dollars for themselves. And in the process, they could jack up costs for people trying to buy a home. This could end up as another Trump administration giveaway for his cronies, great for billionaires, terrible for hardworking people. We also have Mr. Kessler, who has been nominated to a key national security position responsible for administering and enforcing export controls that are critical for advancing our economic and national security. And we have Mr. Moran, nominated to serve as the president's chief economic advisor, responsible for formulating objective analyses on tax policy, tariffs, and more. Now, I can stretch my 5 minutes in only so many directions, so I'll be submitting many questions for the record, as I'm sure many of my colleagues will be doing, both Democrats and Republicans, and I trust we will not bring anyone to the committee for a vote until those questions have been answered in full. I look forward to hearing from all of you today and appreciate your having this hearing.
Thank you, ma'am. I will now swear in the nominees. Will you all please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the United States Senate? You may sit down. Thank you. Your written testimony, your written statements will be made part of the record in its entirety. Please keep your oral comments to 5 minutes. Dr. Myron, you are now recognized.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott, for the very kind introduction. Ranking Member Warren, distinguished members of the committee, it is an honor surpassing any I ever expected to be here before you today as President Trump's nominee to lead his Council of Economic Advisors. It has been a privilege getting to know many of you through this process, learning your concerns and the concerns of your constituents, and I pledge that, if I earn your support, I will give my utmost for the American people, just as you do. I would like to thank President Trump for putting his trust in me to advise him on the economy, and my partner Brett, our son Judah, my parents Jane and Dan, and the rest of our families for their love and support. I grew up in Rockland County, a suburb of New York City, mostly inhabited by working class people who labored tirelessly to make ends meet on behalf of their families. Rockland is filled with tradesmen and women, honest people, whose work ethic and political priorities I absorbed in my youth. When I think of the hardworking Americans who make this country the greatest nation on earth, I think of those folks, my friends and neighbors. In my family, the call to national service is deep and strong. My grandfather served in the African theater of the Second World War and then worked for 4 decades as a postman. My parents were both civil servants who met each other as employees in the Social Security Administration. Closer to my age, I have 3 cousins serving in the Army and Navy. I know that it is a privilege and an honor to work on behalf of the American people. I began my studies of economics at Boston University and then continued them across the river at Harvard. I completed my doctorate under the supervision of Marty Feldstein, who was himself CEA chair for President Reagan. Marty was a seminal figure, inventing and modernizing the field of public economics. Every time I went to him with a research idea, he would say, "Now, pretend I'm a senator, and explain it to me again, and tell me why I should care." That disciplined me into thinking ideas should only matter to economists if they matter to you, which is another way of saying ideas should only matter if they matter to your constituents. It was, frankly, one of the most useful things ever said to me. Although Marty passed a few years ago, I hope I don't disappoint him or your constituents now. After graduate school, I entered the investment profession, in which I've spent my career, other than my time in public service. My first real job was with a team of currency investors in New York. Nothing will disabuse you of 30% of a PhD faster than having your nose blooded in currency markets, which swing around wildly for reasons a trained economist would laugh at. Working in markets gave me a sense of reality that too many academics lack. People joke that academia proceeds one funeral at a time because there's little to discourage academics from holding on to bad ideas. In markets, if you persist in remaining wrong, you can blow up your portfolio, your career, and your firm. That discipline has helped me shed bad ideas more quickly than I otherwise might have. Working in currencies in 2010, I saw how China's currency manipulation wreaked havoc across our industrial base and stole jobs from your constituents. Appreciating the negative effects on the economy required rejecting a number of the common models of international trade, but academics would take years still to accept the so-called China shock. At that time, some former classmates dismissed my concerns as silly, but from its peak almost a half century ago, the United States has lost over a third of its manufacturing workforce, and too many communities reliant upon those jobs were ravaged. The human suffering involved in such losses is enormous. The experience of an economics profession determined to ignore China's predatory behavior shaped my political outlook. Economists too often disregard national security without pausing to consider that our ability to import would become limited should a war or even something like a pandemic break out. Reality demands that we prepare to defend ourselves should the need arrive, and we need manufacturing capacity to do so. My view is that reindustrializing America is imperative not only for economic reasons, but for national security. Economists must accept that we are a nation with an economy, not merely an economy with a nation. To reindustrialize, policy must focus on making the United States the best place on earth to do business. Anyone considering creating jobs, opening a factory, or innovating should think that America is the obvious place to do it. How can we accomplish that? My view is there are 5 critical steps. First, slash regulations that make it difficult, expensive, and slow to build and hire. If it takes many years and great cost to attain the permits necessary to open a factory, firms will look abroad. Further, every regulation is a compliance burden that inflates the cost of doing business. If only big businesses can afford compliance costs, we'll be left with only big businesses, which entails less competition and dynamism and higher prices. Second, we need to continue reforming and cutting taxes so that workers and proprietors keep more of the money they earn. Third, we need to strategically use tariffs to rectify distortions in the terms of trade that stem from other countries' tariffs and barriers to trade, as well as from our production of reserve assets. Our national security and economic dynamism depend on being treated fairly by other countries who have access to our markets and ensuring that our supply chains are resilient. Fourth, we need to invest in skilling up our workforce for modern manufacturing. Finally, we need to engage in defense-driven industrial policy, directing procurement and R&D budgets to activities useful for modern national security. Such policies gave us many of the critical technologies of the 20th century, the internet, radar, sonar, GPS, and created countless jobs. The president has promised to usher America into a new golden age, and he has the right policy ideas and a mandate from the American people to do it. If confirmed, it will be my job to help him. Every policy I propose will have this agenda in mind. To make progress, we'll need advice from all of you to make sure we are as responsive as we can be to voters' concerns. I welcome your input not just today, but if confirmed, for as long as I may hold this position. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Kessler, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, members of the committee. I'm honored to appear before you today as President Trump's nominee to serve as the Undersecretary of Commerce for Industry and Security. I'm deeply grateful to President Trump for nominating me to this important position, and I'd like to thank both the President and Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick for their support and confidence. I'd like to take also a moment to acknowledge my family members who are here with me today, my wife, Bethany, my 2 daughters, Diana and Lucy, and my parents, Linda and Craig. I had the privilege of serving in President Trump's first administration as the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Enforcement and Compliance, after being confirmed unanimously by the Senate. During my time as Assistant Secretary, I was at the center of the Trump administration's aggressive actions to make trade fair and reciprocal. I worked to enforce the trade laws, monitor foreign compliance with trade agreements, and renegotiate international trade pacts that had grown outdated. I was proud to help level the playing field for American businesses, workers, farmers, and ranchers who were injured by unfair trade. After my government service, I returned to private practice as an international trade lawyer. In that role, I've advised clients on today's dynamic geopolitical environment and the changing landscape of international trade and investment rules, including strategic advice on reducing exposure to China and diversifying and strengthening supply chains. The United States' relationship with China and other adversaries is more complex today than ever. America's position as the world's economic and technological superpower is under constant and ever-increasing threat. China's catching up in many cutting-edge areas of technology, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, hypersonics, aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and others. The United States must respond, and must respond with vision and strength, and I hope to be a part of that response. The Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS, is critical for keeping America safe, secure, and prosperous, and ensuring that we meet the challenges of the 21st century. Congress has recognized this and has given BIS powerful legal authorities. The 2018 Bipartisan Export Control Reform Act gave BIS a broad mandate to protect critical technologies and prevent their export and diversion to America's competitors and adversaries. BIS has been working to fulfill this mandate, but it must do much more. BIS must adapt and keep pace with our adversaries, who are ever more sophisticated. If confirmed, I will seek to fully utilize the tools that Congress has given BIS, including both in administering and enforcing export controls. We need strong enforcement to deter noncompliance and to ensure that the rules accomplish their intended purpose. And at the same time, it is important for BIS to pursue a balanced approach and avoid unduly burdening or penalizing American companies and workers with overly complex rules. I am also mindful that diplomacy and international cooperation are an important element of effective export controls. It's critical to engage with America's partners and allies around the world to defend and promote America's technological leadership. Beyond export controls, BIS is also charged with administering other national security laws, including the Information and Communications Technology Services Rule and the associated regulations, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, and parts of the Defense Production Act. If confirmed, I will seek to use the full array of legal authorities available to BIS to help keep America strong, secure, and prosperous. Finally, if confirmed, I hope to work closely with all of you, with the members of this committee, and with Congress as a whole to ensure that BIS is as effective and successful as possible. Thank you. Thank you very much for considering my nomination, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Pulte, please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Scott. Chairman Scott, Warren, and members of this committee, thank you for the honor of being here before you today as President Trump's nominee for Director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. I am grateful for this opportunity to share my vision for the future of our country's housing finance system. First, I want to thank those of you who have met with me. Housing and safety and soundness of the housing market is a bipartisan issue, and I firmly believe that we must work together to address the severe housing challenges that our country faces. I'm grateful for my incredible wife, that's my dad, Diana Pulte, for her unwavering support, and to our 3 wonderful children. I would like to acknowledge my parents, Mark and Noreen Pulte, and my stepmother, Julie Pulte. I especially want to thank President Trump for entrusting me with this nomination and for President Trump's commitment to restoring the American dream of homeownership. My connection to housing began at a young age. While many children spent their weekends at sporting events, I spent my weekends on home building job sites with my father and my grandfather. From the ground up, I learned every aspect of housing, whether it was cleaning job sites, assisting in construction, or helping sell homes. From an early age, I developed a deep passion for home ownership and putting a roof over people's heads. This passion remains my driving force today, and it would guide my work if confirmed as FHFA director. After working for others, I founded my own firm to invest in and manage small businesses. Over years, I've led multiple companies and managed thousands of people. These leadership experiences taught me that strong, effective leadership is essential for success, and that is a lesson that I intend to carry forward at FHFA if confirmed. Subsequently, I joined my grandfather's company, Pulte Homes, during a difficult period when poor management was threatening its future. I stepped in and worked with dedicated partners to revitalize the company. Today, Pulte Homes is more than 3 times the size from when I stepped in, and our efforts have ensured that the company continues to provide housing for hundreds of thousands of Americans. I have seen firsthand the devastating consequences of bad policy on housing and the economy. In 2008, the housing crash nearly destroyed our family's legacy housing company. In 2020, as a director of Pulte Homes, I witnessed how COVID-19 pandemic placed an enormous stress on the housing finance system. If confirmed, my #1 mission will be to strengthen and safeguard the housing finance system. Safe and sound housing markets are the foundation of American homeownership. Additionally, we must ensure that the limited home inventory in this country goes to Americans. Under President Trump's leadership in his first term, Americans were able to realize the American dream of homeownership through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And to that end, while their conservatorship should not be indefinite, any exit from conservatorship must be carefully planned to ensure the safety and soundness of the housing market without upward pressure on mortgage rates. In a nation where I have been given so much, I am committed to giving back. Over the years, I have contributed millions of dollars to families facing foreclosure and other critical needs, including but not limited to keeping people's utilities on and helping pay people's monthly mortgage payments to prevent foreclosure. During COVID, I launched Bailout Humans, part of Twitter philanthropy, to deliver real relief to families at risk of losing their home. I also started the nonprofit Blight Authority with Democrats and Republicans to remove dangerous buildings in underserved communities. Our efforts to remove blight lowered crime, arson, and drug activity. I believe all families should have the opportunity to raise their children in safe neighborhoods and safe homes. President Trump is a builder, and under President Trump's leadership, we will usher in the golden age of homeownership. It is time to begin building again in America. We stand at a pivotal moment in history, and I promise to approach this role with humility, dedication, and a commitment to President Trump's vision for this nation, ensuring that the dream of homeownership becomes a reality for as many Americans as possible. Thank you for your consideration, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McKernan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ranking members, and members of this committee for this opportunity to appear before you today. It is a profound honor to be nominated by President Trump for this position, and I welcome this opportunity to advance the president's pro-growth agenda and his work to enhance excellence and accountability in government. My wife, Sapna Sharma, is here with me today. 7 years ago, we met here on the Hill when we were both starting out as congressional staffers. Today, we have two little ones, two little boys, and a third on the way. And together, she and I hope to instill in our children a shared love of this great country. I'm also supported today by my parents, Patrick and Victoria McKernan, who are here from East Tennessee, and my mother-in-law, Krishna Sharma, my brother, Paul, and his wife, Kenzie. I am forever grateful for their love and support. Over the last 2 years, I have served as a member of the FDIC's board of directors. During that eventful time, the FDIC navigated the second, third, and fourth largest bank failures in its history and the ensuing market stress. An outside investigation led by acting comptroller Sue and me into harassment and other misconduct at the FDIC, the launch of an effort to transform the FDIC's workplace, and several significant, sometimes contentious, rulemakings. I'm especially proud of my work at the FDIC to establish a culture of actual accountability. Before the FDIC, I held staff roles in the Senate, the Department of the Treasury, the FHFA, and even a short detail to the CFPB, all focused on the mortgage market, one of the key markets supervised by the CFPB. Through that work, I developed a detailed understanding of how the mortgage market works and the consumer protection laws that apply to it. Before public service, I spent more than 9 years as a lawyer in private practice focused on banking and consumer financial laws. That work included overseeing large teams investigating compliance issues at complex consumer financial companies. My legal career started just as the 2008 financial crisis was beginning. Watching that crisis unfold left me with an enduring conviction that we must have a financial regulatory system that works for everyday Americans. Consumer protection is critical to that end. All too often, however, the CFPB has gotten in the way of its own mission. It has acted in a politicized manner. It has pushed beyond the limits of its statutory authority. It has seized opportunities to expand its jurisdiction and its power. It has offended our basic notions of fairness and due process when it is regulated by enforcement. And it has harmed consumers through higher prices and reduced choice when it has failed to strike an appropriate balance between the costs and the benefits in prescribing new rules. Now, even if you don't agree with that view, it is clear that the CFPB suffers from a crisis of legitimacy. This must be corrected if the CFPBs that reliably do what it's supposed to do look out for the American consumer. To that noble end, the CFPB needs to be made accountable to our elected officials, and its past excesses need to come to an end. If confirmed, I will fully and faithfully execute the law. Under my watch, the CFPB will take all steps necessary to implement and enforce the federal consumer financial laws and perform each of its other statutorily assigned functions. But the CFPB will do this by centering its regulation on real risk to consumers and by focusing its enforcement on bad actors. Thank you for your consideration. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both, all, for being here with us this morning, and frankly, the last two for saving 1 minute and 58 seconds combined. So I really appreciate that. It's good news. I'm not sure what you'll do with it, but thanks so much for that. Let me start my questions with Dr. Myron. Dr. Myron, obviously, your predecessor, Dr. Bernstein, advocated for extreme policies like the Green New Deal and, frankly, the spending bills, the American Rescue Plan. First bill out of the chute, $1.9 trillion, I believe led to the 9% inflation that we experienced in the summer of 21. How will your recommendations differ from your predecessor?
Thank you, Senator. One of the core principles of economic management of the economy is that economic policy should, as economists say, lean against the wind. That means that when the economy is in a rut, policy should support it with some stimulus to get it out of the rut, to boost employment and stabilize, and stabilize the economy. And when the economy is soaring, well above potential where it could be, that policy should hold back a bit, right? Now, if you look at what happened, the story of stimulus and throughout the COVID experience, when Congress passed the CARES Act, the output gap, the size of the hole in the economy, was about 10% of the economy, right? The size of the CARES Act was roughly similarly sized, so that was appropriate. By the time we get to the American Rescue Plan, the output gap is just about narrowed. It's only about a percentage point of the economy. So following it up with another stimulus package of roughly similar size was an economics 101 style error. And of course, the inflation that we experienced was problematic. My advice, if confirmed, will be to follow the traditional wisdom of leaning against the wind.
Thank you for being succinct. Dr. Byron, as you know, I'm a huge fan of the opportunity zones. And I think that when you think about the overall housing issue, I think opportunity zones could play a significant role. Thoughts?
Thank you. I agree. And President Trump is indeed a strong supporter of opportunity zones, and for good reason. The best available studies to date indicate they've spurred a significant investment into less privileged areas, fast approaching $100 billion, and reached a larger share of the nation's low-income communities than any comparable program over such a short period of time. Indeed, opportunity zones are now reflect 20% of all market rate apartment unit developments nationwide in recent years, in contrast to only 8% before TCGA. We're talking hundreds of thousands of new units. We need more research on opportunity zones and more action extending opportunity zones to help address the housing affordability crisis.
Thank you. Mr. Kessler, you and I had a great conversation. I really appreciate your willingness to serve. Talking about American economic supremacy, from my perspective, means that we have to be superior from a technological perspective. How do export controls help us, especially with China, who I would consider they lie, they cheat, they steal, and they take our technologies to use against us? How do we use export controls to achieve our objectives?
Well, thank you, Chairman Scott. And yeah, it was a great conversation. I appreciate it. Export controls are one critical tool in America's policy toolkit for ensuring continued technological leadership and technological supremacy. And it's part of the mandate, of course, of BIS to pursue that goal. It's up to BIS to ensure that exports prevent the proliferation of weapons, to ensure that we prevent the terrorists from getting dual-use items, to ensure that America preserves its qualitative military superiority, and to protect the defense industrial base. So all of those goals are things that we have to do with export controls. I think part of the challenge for BIS is to be as nimble as our adversaries, to keep pace with them. Our adversaries are sophisticated and they work hard every day to get around export controls and other rules that America has to prevent them from getting sensitive technologies, and we need to keep up.
Thank you. Mr. Pulte, one of the things I appreciate about your background is that you've had generations in housing, even though you're a young fellow. My question for you is, you worked on the Blight Authority, a nonprofit, with Mayor Bing in Detroit, a bipartisan coalition working on behalf of people who desperately needed assistance. How does that inform you about the issues of housing, especially in neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, poverty-stricken, but very smart people, hard workers?
Very good question, and you know the issue better than me, but my experience in some of these urban areas is that there's a lot of drug activity, crime, prostitution in the areas that we were in, and our nonprofit, it was a nonprofit, went in and cleared out these abandoned homes and structures. And what it gave me, Senator, was a deep appreciation for every kid should be able to walk safely to school and not be worried about dangerous buildings or being dragged into a dangerous building and the like. So it gave me a very, very deep understanding for ensuring that every American has the opportunity to have a safe home and a safe neighborhood.
Thank you. Ranking Member Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Co-presidents Donald Trump and Elon Musk seem hell-bent on trying to kill the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Mr. Musk tweeted CFPB RIP and delete the CFPB. Administration operatives evidently ordered everyone to leave the building and then locked the doors and told people not to do any work anywhere. Now, Mr. McKernan, you've been nominated to run this agency where Elon Musk has told everyone to do nothing. You know, it kind of feels like you've been lined up to be the number one horse at the glue factory. So I just want to start with some basics here. Mr. McKernan, would you agree that running an agency means carrying out the core functions of that agency laid out in law?
Yes, as the director, you are tasked with some very specific statutory responsibilities. Those are mandatory, not optional.
Okay, well, let's talk about what it means then to follow the law. Congress writes the law, the executive branch carries out those laws, and the judicial branch is there to tell them if the administrative branches overstep their authorities. You know, it's kind of basic schoolhouse rock, separation of powers stuff. There are at least 88 specific obligations in the Dodd-Frank Act that the CFPB is legally obligated to perform. Congress doesn't suggest that the CFPB do these things or ask the CFPB to do these things. Congress mandates it. So let's hit some of the highlights. Section 1021 of the Dodd-Frank Act says that the CFPB must, quote, implement and enforce federal consumer financial laws consistently for the purpose of ensuring that all consumers have access to markets for consumer financial products and services, and that markets for consumer financial products and services are fair, transparent, and competitive. Mr. McKernan, if confirmed, will you implement and enforce the law so that everyone has fair access to financial products like credit cards and mortgages?
Yes, ranking member, as I said in my opening statement, I'm fully committed to following the law fully and faithfully. That includes performing each of the statutory.
What about Section 1013 of Dodd-Frank, which requires the CFPB to maintain, quote, a single toll-free number, a website, and a database, close quote, to collect consumer complaints about financial products or services, respond, quote, timely to those complaints, and share the consumer complaint data with other federal and state agencies? Mr. McKernan, will you follow the law and maintain the CFPB's consumer complaint hotline so that consumers have somewhere to go when they have a problem with their banks or their mortgage lenders?
Ranking member, as you point out, both Section 1021C and also Section 1022, or I think it's 1023, both task the CFPB with responsibilities relating to consumers. Those are mandatory. If confirmed, I'll follow the law.
Great. Under Section 1013 of Dodd-Frank, the CFPB must maintain an Office of Service Member Affairs for both veterans and active duty military who get cheated, an Office of Financial Protection for older Americans to provide financial counseling and help seniors recognize the warning signs of financial scams, and a student loan office to assist with borrower complaints. Mr. McKernan, if confirmed, do you intend to follow the law and maintain those offices?
Each of the offices I think you mentioned is mandated by statute.
Okay.
It's my understanding those are mandatory. And yes, I'll follow the law.
Okay. So we have the statutory obligations. We've got, like I said, we don't have time to go through all 88 of them. But let me ask you, Mr. McKernan, how do you plan to run the CFPB legally when Elon Musk has told every one of its 1,700 employees to do nothing?
Ranking member, I'm not sure if I agree with the premise that all employees are told to do nothing. I think, I don't know the nuances.
Well, I'm not asking nuance here. All 1,700 employees have been locked out of the building and told to do nothing. And if they hear that another employee is doing something, to report them to DOJ.
Ranking member, I don't know the specifics of the mandate, but I'm fairly certain there were exceptions there. Indeed, to get my application processed so I could get here today, my application had to go through the CFPB.
So you say somebody's doing something. Okay, let me ask it the other way then. You say you want to follow the law. In order to fulfill the legal obligations of the CFPB, do you commit, if confirmed, as soon as you are sworn in, to immediately lift the stop work order?
If confirmed, I'm going to follow the law. The specifics of that, I'm going to have to get advised on the specifics of the situation there. But again, the North Star here is you got to follow the law, fully and faithfully execute the statute. I take that very seriously as a former congressional staffer. I'm an Article 1 guy. I'm going to make sure the CFPB performs each of its statutorily performed
You
functions.
follow the law, then we'll all be good.
That was 13 questions in 5 minutes. You did a really good job.
Correct.
All right. Next would be Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McKernan, I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but at that time, I'm going to ask you a little bit about some of the statutory activity and some of the, what I would consider statutory or activity that was outside of statutory authority, but I'll come back to you in just a minute, sir, and follow up. Mr. Pulte, first of all, to all of you, thank you for offering to do public service. And to your families, because this becomes a huge responsibility and a real time-consuming effort, and I appreciate your family's recognition of that as well. Mr. Pulte, since the global financial crisis, a robust private credit risk transfer, or CRT, market has been a key reform supported by Republicans on this committee and members of both parties. Instituted in 2013, CRT has protected taxpayers, attracted private capital, and provided market discipline to reduce GSE-driven risks. It also plays a crucial role in lowering mortgage costs and preparing for the end of conservatorships. As you work to keep housing affordable and maintain the safety and the soundness of the enterprises, plan for the eventual end of conservatorships, will you commit to supporting a strong CRT market to protect homeowners, taxpayers, and overall market stability?
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and I very much enjoyed our meeting. Always good to meet a fellow pilot as well. With regard to CRT, I think it's very important. I think any time that you can take risk away from the taxpayers and give it to the private market is a win. And so I very much enjoyed our conversations about CRT, and I would absolutely look forward to working with you on CRT and make sure that the taxpayers are always at as least risk as possible.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McKernan, let me come back to you for just a minute. Given your deep understanding of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and its founding principles, you bring a very valuable insight into both its intended mission and the way that it has evolved over the years. In recent years, we've seen the CFPB extend its authority beyond its original scope, creating uncertainty for businesses and financial institutions. With your knowledge, experience, and commitment to fair and effective regulation, you are well suited to lead the Bureau, and until we can ultimately reform the CFPB, I believe you will restore a balanced approach that protects consumers without stifling economic growth. Over the past several years, do you feel that the CFPB has been operated outside of its statutory authority?
Yes, Senator, there have been, all too often cases in which the CFPB has acted beyond the statutory authority, and it's, you don't have to take my word for it. You can ask the courts.
Once confirmed, what will be your first priority?
So I think the way I think about my approach to the CFPB is we've got to refocus it on its mission. We need to right-size it, make sure that we have an efficient CFPB, and we need to reinstate some accountability to our elected officials. A big part of the CFPB's problem has very little accountability either to Congress or to the president. I think that's part of the reason we've had these recurring episodes of the CFPB pushing the limits. I think it's really important that we instate some accountability.
Mr. Kessler, the U.S. has spent years tightening export controls on AI chips, yet we just witnessed what may be the most consequential AI export violation in history. In October of 2024, we saw reports from the New York Times that TSMC produced hundreds of thousands of controlled chips for Huawei. This wasn't smuggling, it was an enforcement failure of the Biden administration that could have been avoided by basic due diligence. What will be your approach to setting future export control policy, and how will you improve enforcement and close compliance loopholes?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. This is obviously a huge concern, both the instance that you mentioned and every instance of China's advancing technology in AI and in semiconductors. It's critical to ensure that we have strong enforcement, that BIS uses the full scope of enforcement and penalty authorities that it has, that we're conducting investigations, working in an integrated way with the intelligence community, with the defense community, to prioritize our enforcement targets, and to make sure that the rules themselves are appropriately targeted to the challenges that we face. So I hope to work on that if confirmed.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moran, I can't leave without at least addressing you and saying I really appreciated our opportunity to visit. Would it be fair to say that one of the best things we can do for the American public, consumers, farmers, ranchers, businessmen, is to bring down the price of interest, or the interest price in this country?
Thank
Interest
you.
rates.
Thank you, Senator. I couldn't agree more that would be profoundly important, not just for all the folks that you mentioned, but for all Americans who are pursuing the American dream.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. So next will be Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Pulte, when we were in the office, I asked about your support for the Housing Trust Fund, and you asked to have a chance to look more deeply into that, and I presume you've done that. The Housing Trust Fund is particularly important along with the Capital Magnet Fund because they're the only federal programs that build housing specifically for the lowest income Americans, and they are suffering homelessness at significant rates. So let me follow up. Will you commit to support the Housing Trust Fund and the Capital Magnet Fund?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I very much appreciated meeting with you and talking about affordable housing. As you know, that's also a very big passion of mine, and I look forward to working with you on that if confirmed. As you know, those are in the statute and the law, and I have every intention, and I will follow the law, and I will follow the statute.
I would hope robustly, too, by ensuring that they're properly funded and deployed aggressively.
And I would mention, too, that I think one of the opportunities is to see where is that money going? Are we using the money as wisely as we can? And I think now having a housing and mortgage person in charge of it, we look forward to, if confirmed, going in and seeing where that money is being spent and making sure that as many homes are being built as possible through these funds.
Thank you. Mr. McKernan, Senator Warren has touched upon this, but the Military Lending Act is a legislation that on a bipartisan basis I introduced along with Senator Nelson and Senator Talent of Missouri. And it's very important to me because I've had experience in the military and seen soldiers, sailors, Marines, whatever, really exploited by merchants. And ironically, they all seem to be wearing the American flag on that lapel, but that's another story. You reinforce the MLA and make sure it's appropriately enforced, and that means really vigorously staffing and allowing the Office of Service Members Affairs to exist.
Senator, thank you for the question. Yes, I certainly would ensure that the CFPB performs its role with respect to enforcement of the Military Lending Act, and also with respect to the Office of Service Members. As you know better than anyone, there is a range of unique issues that pose consumer risks to our service members, with their relocations, their deployments abroad, that can make it very difficult to deal with issues when they have them back home with their bank, with their financial provider. And, they also have unique risks, say, for instance, in the auto lending space, right? The geographic isolation of their base can mean they have fewer options to shop, both for cars and for financing, and that can mean higher costs for service members. So I think these and other issues are very important for the CFPB to continue to monitor and also continue to coordinate with the rest of the governmental authorities on this. And the Office of Service Members has an important role in that.
Well, I appreciate that very much, and I know you want to, but you're going to be placed in a very difficult position. Directive vote at the OMB has canceled the lease on the CFPB headquarters, so technically you don't have any place to work. They've canceled contracts for expert witnesses that are in ongoing litigation. They've dismissed cases against predatory lenders, including some cases involving the Military Lending Act. they've essentially tried to lay off the staff. Indeed, President Trump said in the Oval Office that the CFPB was set up to destroy people, quote, and that his goal for the CFPB is to, quote, be totally eliminated. He also said that the CFPB staff is a, quote, vicious group of people. So you do not appear to have much presidential support or OMB support, and I have this sinking feeling that you're departing Liverpool on the Titanic. So good luck.
Thank you. And you left 20 seconds on the table. Thank you, sir.
I'm going to yield it back because I'm sure my colleagues can use it.
Thank you. Senator Tillis.
Hello, Mr. McKernan, and I'm going to come to you, but to all the nominees, congratulations. You should take it as the honor that it is. I hope to get to some of you all, but Mr. McKernan, you're the sort of person that other people on the panel should appreciate because I suspect you're going to get most of the questions. I think some people would suggest that you lack experience. So I typically don't try to reduce things to yes or no answers, but I'd like to get some yes or no's with maybe a quick sentence on a couple of things because people say you just lack experience for the job. I disagree. Do you hold an undergraduate degree in economics as well as a JD?
Yes, Senator.
And that, I think, came from Duke?
The JD.
JD?
Tennessee, proud volunteer for the.
Do you have experience practicing law related to banking, financial services industry?
Yes, Senator. 9 years.
Give me an idea, I think, between 2007 and 2017?
That's right. Well, 2007 to 2017, that's right, yes.
Yeah. Do you have experience working on fair lending, consumer protection law involving areas such as Truth in Lending Act, the Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and the laws governing unfair, deceptive, and abusive acts or practices?
Yes, Senator, did quite a bit of that work in private practice. Then obviously in my 6 or 7 years focused on the mortgage markets. And then I oversee the enforcement committee at the FDIC, which includes a number of those laws.
Mm-hmm. Do you have experience interpreting consumer financial protection laws?
Yes, Senator.
Any examples?
Well, like I said, almost 10 years in private practice and then in the work at the FDIC, both dealing with supervisory matters that come before the board, but also the enforcement work and the enforcement committee.
Do you have any experience related to mortgage markets, a key area of the CFPB's regulatory and supervisory jurisdiction?
Yes, Senator. I work with Senator Corker, Senator Toomey, covering mostly housing finance mortgage issues. And then 2 years at FHFA, focused on mortgage finance issues. And then, of course, at the FDIC, we have quite a bit of mortgage activity.
And do you have experience working with CFPB staff?
Yes, I was detailed there for a short time while I was at FHFA.
Do you have experience with senior leadership at the federal financial regulator?
Yes, Senator. As a member of the board of directors, got to know a number of my counterparts and, of course, the folks at the FDIC.
Do you have experience working and collaboratively with others in senior leadership positions at federal financial regulator, regardless of their political affiliation, to address complex banking and financial services issue? And give me an example if you can.
Yeah, acting comptroller Sue and I partnered together to oversee the investigation to our workplace culture matters. I think that was an investigation that really earned a lot of respect on a bipartisan basis. And then I worked with Director Chopra to address gaps in the FDIC's monitoring of asset managers' large investments in our banking institutions.
And maybe added to that, I know that I believe that the record indicates that you've also worked on workplace and cultural issues at the institution. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, after the Cleary Gottlieb report, I pushed quite hard for the FDIC board to take more of an active role in overseeing our cultural transformation efforts. A particular focus was trying to get us investigating some of the allegations of misconduct involving senior executives that had been identified by Cleary Gottlieb. That unfortunately was about 5 months of debate, but we did eventually get those investigations started.
You think the CFPB is a prudential regulator?
No.
Good answer. Mr. Pulte, I may come back to you, Mr. McKernan. Mr. Pulte, I had one question for you because of your deep experience in construction. I hear a lot of people talk about we need more inventory for affordable housing. And almost invariably, it's in the discussion about how we need more regulations for housing. How do those two work in your professional experience? Not necessarily in the lanes for the role that you're you're moving into. But how do those two aren't those at cross purposes with one another? How can we produce more affordable housing in the context of more regulations? Is that something I just don't understand?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. They're almost inversely related, as you pointed out. But obviously, the regulations in some ways exist for a reason. I would say, depending on the municipality, if you look at like the state of Texas, for example, a lot less regulation than, for example, California in some cases. I think one of the beauties of President Trump is that he is laser focused on slashing useless regulations. And I expect him to continue to be doing that. And if confirmed as FHFA director, I'll be looking to do everything that we can while also following the law and the statute.
Thank you, Mr. McKernan. Is rulemaking by enforcement an effective way to conduct regulation?
No, Senator.
Can you give me an example of one example of why that's a bad thing?
Yeah, well, it offends our basic notions of fairness. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can look to the courts on this. One of the most perhaps egregious examples of the CFPB was where a mortgage servicer, they retroactively applied a new rulemaking that was 180 degrees opposite the prior agency's rule. They applied that rule retroactively beyond the statute of limitations. And when the DC Circuit panel looked at this case, when they looked at this when it was on appeal, and this is a panel, not just one judge, the panel said this, quote, violated bedrock principles of due process, this retroactive application beyond that. This is what's got to come to an end at the CFPB.
Thank you. I look forward to supporting all of your confirmations.
On behalf of the chairman, Senator Warner.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. And I think Mr. Pulte just kind of maybe put the core of everything we're talking about. You know, I'm for getting rid of useless regulations as well. But the question is, what are useless regulations? And I think they're legitimate areas we can disagree on. I hate to kind of follow on my friend Senator Tillis, but Mr. McKernan, I enjoyed our conversation. And let me say for the record, I enjoyed working with you, particularly during your time with Senator Corker. I thought you were fair. I thought you had a reasonable approach. I don't question your qualifications. Also worked with you with Senator Toomey. I do want to echo something you said, and I hope you'll reconfirm in our conversation, that you didn't have a complete, the way some of my colleagues think that everything the prior leadership did at the CFPB did somehow was bad, that you did think that some of the predecessor policies like the data broker rules and privacy issues, CFPB had acted accordingly.
Well, Senator, one thing I do commend Director Chopra on was his work to increase our attention on some of the very significant policy issues posed by data collection, whether it's data aggregators, data brokers, and there's privacy issues here. There's potentially national security issues here. And I think it's important that we, both in the regulated space and in the rest of our elected officials, continue to focus on this as these entities are collecting more and more data and the analytics get more and more powerful. There's some real policy issues here. And I think Director Chopra was onto something by focusing on
and I hope, again, that comment that not everything bad in the last administration, not everything the last administration touched, even at CFPB, was bad, will not cost you votes on the majority side. But I do have to tell you, and Senator Reed was getting at this, I got folks that are terrified. I had a lady call the other day, didn't know whether she'd get money out of her bank anymore because of fear of consumer protections. I had somebody who had a mom scam for $80,000. I am hugely afraid of OMB Director Vogt's attempt to, frankly, terrorize, traumatize the federal workforce. And Senator Reed gave the question. I'll give you a chance to answer it. You're an independent agency. I remember very well how you were created, and it was a negotiation with then Senator Shelby, and it was frankly our Republican friends who said, "Let's not have it a new agency. Let's put it under the funding cycle of the Fed." But are you going to be able to stand up to Director Vogt? You got to enforce the law.
Senator, I'm going to enforce the law. That's my commitment to you. That means performing each of the statutorily assigned responsibilities for the CFPB. And I will just say that, I think my record speaks to my willingness to assert my point of view, and I'm not going to be,
Well, again, but this is the nub. I share Senator Warren's view that, nobody elected Elon Musk and his Doge Bros. But you're going to have to stand up to this? And would you acknowledge again? And Senator Warren may have missed this, where the nominee actually acknowledged that under Director Chopra, good things occasionally happened, but we also at least acknowledge that that the $20 billion returned to 195 million consumers was actually a good record from the CFPB.
Well, Senator, I think it's important that we have redress to consumers. I think it's important that bad actors, repeat offenders, do have. How
about I go to the Tom Tillis mode? That's a yes or no question. $20 billion back to consumers across America, good or bad?
Senator, I don't think we should evaluate the success of the CFPB based on dollar numbers or enforcement count. That's like evaluating an official based on the number of fouls he calls during the game. We should evaluate the game on whether it's fair. We should evaluate the CFPB director based on whether we have fair.
You're going the wrong direction. It bothers me if you can't say $20 billion back to American consumers based upon illicit activity. And listen, I'm, notoriously viewed as way too pro-banker on my side of the aisle. But you should. Let me just give you a little bit. Let me just give you a little coaching here. When my Republican colleagues tried desperately to get the ODNI director to acknowledge that Edward Snowden was a traitor, and the nominee couldn't bring herself to say those words. Think about that, and then getting $20 billion back in rebates to American consumers, good or bad?
Senator, it is very important that we have customer redress as part of the remedies. That's one important just in its own right. You've got to make customers whole when they're harmed. You also have to keep the playing field level across market participants. And if bad actors are able to keep ill-gotten gains, then that gives them a competitive advantage.
Just say yes.
Restitution is good. But I am not going to get in the practice of evaluating the success of the Bureau based on dollar numbers.
But the way we measure, I agree. The number of fouls called is not. But if there is a process, do you think part of that $20 billion was inappropriately returned? Were the institutions cheated out of that money?
On restitution, I'm not aware of any that was.
Okay, so then the answer would be yes. I just would like one last. I didn't get to you, Mr. Pulte, on we talked about GSE reform, and Mr. McKiernan it is a gnarly issue. Do not do this quickly for a tax pay for the reconciliation bill. If we're going to do an explicit guarantee, it's got to be paid for. Last point, I appreciate Senator Rounds, and there was a minute and a half given back.
Yeah, I noticed.
I'm not going to go the whole minute and a half.
You're pushing it a little bit.
But I would just
refer ability here. So,
Mr. McKiernan, as you look at the CFPB and you look at adequate staffing and right sizing, I would go back again to the Inspector General. Inspector General, what's this? 30 seconds. Inspector General concluded after the Signature Bank collapse that one of the reasons the FDIC screwed up in delays in supervisory activities was because there were shortfalls in terms of personnel at the agency. I hope you would take that lesson from the OIG at FDIC in your current job before you go willy-nilly and look at the workforce at the CFPB and bring the chainsaw approach. Thank you.
And with that, Senator Kennedy.
Mr. Pulte.
Yes, sir.
The Biden administration allowed borrowers to take out bigger mortgages than they can afford, didn't it?
Senator, I do think that we need to make sure.
Did it allow them to take out bigger mortgages than they can afford or not?
I think sometimes people definitely do take out mortgages that they can't afford.
Okay. In fact, 64% of the FHA borrowers last year exceeded the 43% debt-to-income ratio, didn't it?
I would believe that to be true. I'm not familiar with that
In
statistic.
fact, the FHA loan portfolio today is bigger than it was before the 2008 housing crisis, isn't it?
I would believe that to be true, but FHFA would be under HUD, so I...
And when people borrow more money than they can afford, many times they default. Is that true?
That is true.
And I'm not just picking on FHA. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have done this too, haven't they?
Yes, sir.
Now, normally when people borrow too much money, they default. But under the Biden administration, They implemented a program where if you're about to default, the taxpayers will pay your mortgage. Isn't that correct?
Do you have a specific policy that you're referencing, Senator?
Yeah, the FHA instituted a program that pays mortgage servicers to make borrowers miss payments for them.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I'm not familiar with that specific FHA
Well, you
program.
need to be.
I would be happy to look into
You
it and
need to
get back
be.
with you.
They take taxpayer money, and they give it to people, and it's added to the principal of their home without accruing interest, so that a lot of these folks now have homes on which they owe more money than the home is worth.
Yes.
You're not familiar with that?
Well, I'm familiar with that general concept, yes, sir. And if I was...
Isn't it a fact that the FHA made 556,841 incentive payments last year?
Sir, I'm not familiar with that exact statistic. FHFA would be under my friend and colleague, Scott Turner.
Right, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac did the same thing, didn't they?
They probably did.
So we got a house of cards here. It's worse than it was before the 2008 housing crisis. You've got the federal government adopting a policy, don't worry about how much you make. We'll loan you all you need to buy a home. And then when folks get in trouble, the federal government says, don't worry about it. We'll make your payments for you. So you won't default, or you won't have to sell your home. That's one of the reasons housing prices are so high, isn't it?
In many ways, yes, sir. And I think that safety and soundness is absolutely critical.
Are you going to fix that?
I'm going to work day and night, sir. Yes, sir, to work very strongly.
I'm going to adopt the Tillis rule. Is that a yes or a no?
I will absolutely work on that issue, I promise.
I mean, this is absurd. Now, I want everybody who can afford it to own a home.
Yes, sir.
But if you start giving away money and giving away homes, we're going to have another housing crisis.
We can't let that happen.
And the numbers are worse today as a result of the Biden administration than they were in 2008. Are they not?
I'm not sure which numbers you're specifically referring to, but inflation is way out.
I'm referring to the accurate numbers.
I believe that the last 4 years have been extremely challenging.
Well, I appreciate all that, but don't start talking like a bureaucrat. You're not confirmed yet. We got a problem here. You got to address it.
Yes, sir. And I will be laser focused on this issue. And
Dr. I can't see that for Dr. Moran. One of the best ways to get down prices is to deregulate, isn't it?
Thank you, Senator. I do agree that regulations prevent production, and if we can remove regulations, we can get more production.
Well, I'm hoping that you and Russ Vogt will focus, among other things, on deregulation. Now, I know everybody's talking about DOGE and immigration and the war in Ukraine and the Super Bowl, but meanwhile, people are still suffering from high prices. Very predictable, because when you have inflation and you get it down, that's disinflation. But the housing prices, or the high prices, still remain. It's not President Trump's fault. That's just the way it works. Now, we can make those prices go down, but we have to go into a recession, wouldn't we?
Senator,
that's one way, isn't it?
Senator,
I got 30 seconds. That's one way, isn't it?
Yes, it's not.
Well, but you let Warner go on like a he was wild as a March hare.
I'm still letting you go on for a little bit, but
okay.
Now you're 47.
My point is one of the ways to get prices down is to start deregulating.
That's a much better way.
And I'm hoping the White House is going to get you and Russ Vogt to focus on it.
I agree. Removing barriers to the abilities of firms to produce will get them to produce more stuff, lower prices.
My work here is done.
And with that, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, I think. First of all, to the panelists, thank you for your willingness to do this at this point in time. It is important that we have people there that understand the background experience of the agency that's needed, but you also have the experience. And welcome to all your family members that have to sit through this. Let me start with you, Mr. Pulte. Can I kind of want to put it back. We got off the rails there for a minute, and I saw you struggling there, and rightfully so. Let's talk about the agency that you are actually nominated for, which is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, not FHA, which you have no control over, but I appreciate you trying to answer those questions. But I do know this, and thank you for meeting with me, because we had a great conversation. And we talked about the fact that under the Federal Housing Finance Agency, there was a comprehensive review of the federal home loan banks. And this is something that I have been following and is important for me and in my state, because we have a housing crisis, particularly affordable housing or workforce housing crisis. And I'm curious now if you've had the chance to review it, and which recommendation from the comprehensive review do you plan to support and implement?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I very much enjoyed meeting with you as well. As you know, the state of Nevada has been very important to our family over the years. The family's legacy company's probably built over 10,000 homes in Nevada. So very much appreciated meeting with you, and think very highly of your staff as well. They care about this issue very deeply. With regard to some of the things that we talked about, I was able to look at some of the material that you prepared. I believe very strongly that we need to follow the law and the statute, particularly as it relates to the federal home loan banks. This is something I also talked about with Senator Warren when I was in her office, was, will the statute and the law be followed? And I think it's very important as it relates to the federal home loan banks. A lot of times people forget about the federal home loan banks because they're so focused on Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And I would absolutely work with you on that, and I look forward to doing that.
So let me ask you this. Do you support requiring the federal home loan banks provide more than 20% of their net income for affordable housing and community development?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I know this is something that you and your staff feel very passionately about, and I would absolutely continue to work with you on it. As it pertains to this issue, I will follow the law and follow the statute, and be open-minded with anything, including ideas that you have on this matter. But in terms of that question, I'd like the benefit of getting inside of the organization first, if confirmed, and then be able to give you a better answer to that question.
Thank you. Mr. McKiernan, again, appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Let me ask you a couple questions about the CFPB. Unfortunately, in Nevada, we rank second in financial fraud, and a high percentage of that fraud are seniors. And I know I have concerns about the CFPB actually closing down the Office of Financial Protection for Older Americans. And so my question to you is, will you commit to restoring that office, specifically ensuring that the office is adequately staffed and meeting the legislative and regulatory and reporting requirements of the law so that we can protect older Americans?
Senator, you're absolutely right around the unique risk posed to elderly Americans on the consumer side. As they age, they're more likely to accumulate medical debt that can subject them to aggressive collection tactics. There are, of course, some issues around cognitive decline that can make it harder to resolve their issues. And so, it is important that the CFPB continue to monitor those issues, devote enforcement and supervision resources to those ends, and coordinate with the other agencies. And as you point out, there is also a statutory responsibility to maintain this office that is helping to do that coordination and monitoring. So yes, I think consistent with what I said in my opening statement, I'm going to follow a law that includes performing each of the statutorily assigned responsibilities, and one of those is this office.
So if the administration tells you to fire the people in that division, you're going to disagree with them, because the law says that office has to exist and it has to be staffed, and there has to be resources to seniors to protect them from fraud. Is that
And
right?
we're going to make sure we have that office perform its statutory function.
Okay. Let me ask you this. The law also requires the Consumer Bureau to maintain the confidentiality of information obtained from people and companies it supervises and supports. You know this. So what will you do to ensure that people who should not have access to private supervisory information and who have conflicts of interest, what will you do to ensure that they are prevented from accessing it?
Senator, we're going to implement our policy to protect the security of that information. I think another thing that is important on this note is I would really like to take a close look at how much information the CFPB has still on its servers and whether that's really necessary. There's been a lot of focus on this issue, and I think we need to be focused on both risks, external and internal. We also should be thinking about the risks that China or another adversary get a hold of that information.
Yeah, and making it public. Let me ask you this. Do you believe the Consumer Bureau should continue to regulate payment platforms?
Senator, we have the CFPB. If I'm confirmed, the CFPB and I will execute on its responsibility to monitor risks under all the consumer financial laws. That's both in the banking system and outside the banking
And that would
system.
include payment platforms. So do you believe that one company with a payment platform should be allowed to access confidential information from the CFPB of its competitors?
Senator, I don't know the terms of any, the nature of any such issue.
The answer should be no.
Right.
Right.
I'm not sure.
That's pretty easy to answer. So that's my concern here. You don't need to study it. I think it's pretty easy to answer that.
Yeah.
And the question will be, and this is what we talked about, and I think for all of you, what we are looking for, every single one of you have talked about following the law. And that's what I'm hoping you do. And not a rubber stamp to an administration that thinks that they have the ability to disregard the law, ignore Congress and the agencies that we have created and shut them down to the detriment of people in this country. So I am hopeful that you guys are standing guard and you're doing
I'll
just
give
that.
you a chance to respond if you would like to, or we're going to go on.
Senator, I'm fine. Thank you.
All right, Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of a fine Tennessean here today. We've got a panel of highly qualified nominees, but in particular, I'd like to recognize Jonathan McKernan, a native of the volunteer state who's dedicated much of his life to public service. And by electing President Trump, Americans have voiced their desire for national leadership that reflects the values and interests of all Americans spread across the heart of our country, not just power centers in our nation's coast. Jonathan's upbringing in East Tennessee and his remarkable resume give me confidence that the CFPB will be in the hands of a leader who will make very good on this mandate. I'll come back to you, Jonathan, but I'd like to start out with you, Mr. Pulte. The FHFA ensures that its regulated entities fulfill their mission by serving as reliable sources of liquidity and funding for housing finance and community investment. If you're confirmed, how will you carry out the mission of making housing more affordable for all Americans?
Thank you, Senator. What a great question. And very nice meeting with you and spending some time with you. I think you're exactly correct. I think first and foremost is we need to have a safe and sound market. Obviously, we saw what happened in the housing crisis, and eventually everybody wasn't even able to afford anything. So that's first and foremost is a safe and sound market. The other thing is we need to look out and figure out where we can eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. I look forward to looking at that, seeing where we can potentially identify things and what have you. The other thing is we can make sure that we are looking at different opportunities to appraise homes properly, or look at manufactured homes, for example. Manufactured homes are very well-built structures. And if confirmed as FHFA director, I believe that there are really some great opportunities between my friend and colleague at HUD, Scott Turner, in terms of manufactured housing, as well as on the mortgage side at FHFA. So there's a lot of exciting things that we could do, Senator, and I look forward to working with you on some of the ideas we discussed.
And a lot of the issues, a lot of the hurdles I think that you're going to find have to do with regulations that actually get in the way and impair the function of the market and increase cost on builders and impact in a negative way the available supply. So I'll look forward with working with you on that respect as well. I really want to just emphasize that your private sector insight on these matters is rare, and it's much needed here in Washington. I understand the need for policy experts in agencies like the FHFA, but we also need leaders that have business backgrounds who deeply understand the industries that they interact with. And I think you've got a deep experience here that could really lend a lot to the agency. And I'd just like to ask you broadly, what are the most valuable leadership lessons that you've learned in your time in the housing industry, and how would you apply those as you take on this agency's challenge?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I would say that first and foremost, I'd like to go into the agency as well as understand with Fannie and Freddie Mac exactly the talent that we have. I understand that there's quite a bit of talent in this organization. You know, I was fortunate to be raised by my father and grandfather, both who were entrepreneurs. And I learned from my grandfather, whose company, which I eventually joined, which built over 800,000 homes across America. And so, Senator, there's a lot of lessons that I learned both in housing and in managing people, how to treat people, and how to provide for a roof over people's heads. And it's with that same spirit and dedication. You know, housing is in my blood. And I look forward to really bringing that into the agency if confirmed. and ensuring that as many Americans as possible can have the American dream. Right now, costs are just so out of control, Senator. This needs to be fixed.
I look forward to seeing your energy. I think it's contagious, and I look forward to your inspiration in an agency that we want to see function well. Mr. McKernan, I'm going to come back to you now. Dodd-Frank established, in my view, an undemocratic and seriously flawed funding structure for the CFPB. And I think it's important to clarify the statutory authorities here. Acting Director Russell Vought has requested no funds from the Federal Reserve for the coming fiscal quarter, partly because the CFPB's current balance is excessive. In your view, did the Acting Director break the law?
Senator, let me say first, thank you for the very kind words. To appreciate that. We're going to have to let the courts decide that, but I don't see a legal issue there.
Nor do I. So to confirm, the CFPB director has sole discretion to assess the needs of the Bureau and make funding requests accordingly, so long as the request abides by statutorily prescribed funding caps. Is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
I thought so. So Acting Director Russell Vought isn't doing anything unlawful or unusual. In my view, he's simply exercising the authorities given to him by the Democrats who architected Dodd-Frank and the CFPB's funding structure in the first place. There's a glaring double standard here. Progressives are gleeful when a Democrat administration appoints a CFPB director who unaccountably advances their partisan agenda and spends an eye-watering amount of money. Then, when Americans entrust a Republican administration and a Republican director to lead the agency, Democrats suddenly panic and complain that the Bureau is being operated unaccountably, even though both administrations are operating under the exact same structure. For years, I've led legislative proposals to bring greater accountability to the CFPB. If there are true concerns, I urge my colleagues to work with me on real structural reforms. Otherwise, these cries of rogue leadership to the CFPB will just continue to fall on deaf ears. So I hope that we'll have an opportunity to find a way forward on a bipartisan basis to address this concern. Thank you, Mr. McKernan.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Congress created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, in the wake of the financial crisis, during which Americans saw Wall Street bankers get bailed out, while millions of working folks lost their jobs, their homes, their retirements, their life savings. That's the situation out of which the CFPB emerged. Mr. McKernan, thank you. I enjoyed our meeting yesterday. Good to meet you. And I want to follow up on our discussion about the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the CFPB, the agency you've been nominated to run. President Trump has said the CFPB is, quote, a very important thing to get rid of. Yes or no, do you agree with the president on that point?
Senator, as I've said, the CFPB is a product of statute. That is a question for our elected officials.
It's a yes or no question. Do you agree that it's a very good thing to get rid of?
Senator, I think our elected officials decide normative questions like that. I just execute on the law.
You've raised your hand to run the agency. I think you ought to know whether you think it's a good thing to get rid of.
Well, I will say this. I certainly think that consumer protection is a very good thing. It's a critical thing. A federal consumer protection role is a very important thing. That's a lesson I learned from my experience in the 2008 financial crisis. We need to have a regulatory system that works for everyday Americans, and that includes a consumer protection function.
I'll take that as that you agree with the president that we don't need the CFPB. We need consumer protection, but not the CFPB. Is that your answer?
We need to have a strong consumer protection function.
So President Trump and Elon Musk have basically gotten rid of the CFPB, which is why the question is so urgent. And the Bureau has seen dozens of key employees fired. They've been told not to engage in its core supervisory or examination duties required by the law, and has even had its physical headquarters closed and locked. I think that's a pretty clear message. If someone closes down the office that you've been nominated to run, with the CFPB effectively eliminated, how on earth do you plan to lead a shell agency that's been completely gutted?
Senator, I'm not aware of the situation about the staffing and resources at the CFPB. But what I will point to is just what the administration has said in its filings and some of the litigation ongoing here. And they have said that we are going to have a CFPB that is streamlined and efficient. And quoting, I think, from the brief here, it says a predicate of that is there will be a CFPB. Again, though, this is a question for our elected officials. My job is to follow the law and execute on my mandate.
In the last 3 months alone, the CFPB has received more than 80,000 complaints from Georgians, with the Bureau currently seeking resolution to more than 40,000 of those complaints. With the CFPB shuttered by President Trump and Elon Musk, what's your plan to ensure that the Bureau resolves those 40,000 pending complaints from my constituents in Georgia?
So like I said, the consumer complaint function is a statutorily required function. That's in 1021C. And so my mandate, if I'm confirmed, is to fulfill faithfully, fully that statutory mandate.
Mr. Pulte, when we met in my office, thank you very much, Mr. McKernan. When we met in my office, we discussed the issue of appraisal bias, the disturbing trend of homes with Black or Latino residents being systematically valued less than homes with white residents. This is pretty well documented. And, this is discrimination that denies these families the wealth and home equity they've worked hard to earn. As I said to you in my office, this is real money. You think about the value of the most important asset that most people have, literally to have its appraisal depend on who opens the door is unconscionable. And we agreed that data on home appraisal bias is economic data, and that you are a proponent, you said, of transparency and publicizing such data. Do you still believe that?
Thank you, Senator. My recollection of the meeting is that I would like to get inside of the agency and understand exactly what specific data you're looking at. But generally speaking, I'm in favor of all economic data being looked at before saying whether or not something should be released. Having said that, transparency is a hallmark of what I've done. And as it pertains to appraisals, especially with the populations that you're talking about, my experience in Detroit is very relevant. And I very much understand the issue, and I would look forward to working with you if confirmed.
So under the Biden administration, the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which you've been tapped to lead, helped lead an interagency working group to address appraisal bias and provide more public data on the issue to shine a light on this problem. Should FHFA continue to play a role in addressing appraisal bias? I think that's a yes or a no answer.
Thank you, Senator. Appraisals are absolutely critical, and if confirmed, I look forward to working with you on that issue and understanding.
It's good to hear your answer. I just want to make sure that I respect the time. When HUD Secretary Turner sat in my office, he said that he expressed genuine interest in learning more about appraisal bias, but on his first day as secretary, he deleted all public-facing information about HUD's previous work to tackle appraisal bias. Mr. Pulte, if confirmed to lead FHFA, will you commit to maintaining all data, publications, and other materials concerning appraisal bias on the agency's public-facing website?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Again, I'd like the benefit of getting inside of the agency. I'd like to work with you on this. I'd like to work with your staff on this. I know this is something that you're very passionate about. You know, my family's legacy company is based in Georgia. Atlanta's been very good to our family. I'd love to come and take you up on your offer to visit your church. I'd very much like to work with you on this, but I'd love the benefit of being inside of the organization before giving you definitive answers one way or the other.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator, who's next? Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pulte, I'll start with you since you wore such a great tie this morning. I couldn't be more proud of President Trump to nominate you. Your background, your experiences are perfect for this job, the insights that you bring to it. You might know that under the Biden administration, they enacted some policies that I think were really bad, sent a really bad signal to working class families. Let me talk about one of them. Under the Biden administration, they changed the formula for the loan level price adjustment fee that screwed families with good credit scores to subsidize more families with bad credit scores. And I wonder what message does that send to people who work hard, who pay their bills on time, who are doing all the right things? What message would that policy have sent to them?
Thank you, Senator. It's a great question. Loan level price adjustments, pricing is essentially what I view it to be. I believe generally should be priced on risk. Now, having said that, I think that it's something that I'd like the benefit of, if confirmed, going into the agency, understanding it, understanding specifically with the data inside of the agency before I give you a definitive answer on what, if anything, should be done. But generally, I believe that pricing should be done on risk. That's how we avoid another 2008 or housing crisis, is we got to ensure the safety and soundness of the housing market.
Yeah, fortunately, the Biden administration, on the way out the door, they ended the policy in December. But I hope that we never allow something like that to happen again. I mean, it's a bad signal to send to hardworking families who do the right thing, and that they would be punished for it. So I appreciate your commitment to look at that and make sure that we don't bring back bad policies like that. Dr. Moran enjoyed our visit in my office a few weeks ago. As you know, this week Apple announced its plans to invest $500 billion in the United States, creating over 20,000 jobs, especially in advanced manufacturing. I wonder, what role do you think that the president's tariff policies played in that announcement?
Thank you, Senator. And yes, I very much agreed the opportunity to discuss these issues with you in your office. I think the president's policies played a very large role in such an announcement. The president has been very clear that he's not going to stand for asymmetric trade relationships in which we give unfettered market access to our consumers to other countries and they don't reciprocate. And he's made clear that he's going to stand up for American workers and American firms. And I think that his very clear willingness to do so is incentivizing not only investment in the United States from companies like Apple, but also other countries, sort of beginning to make concessions on national security and on trade as well, even preemptively before any threats have been made.
Why do you think so many economists tell us the opposite? The tariffs are going to cost us jobs in the U.S., and yet this announcement sort of proves the opposite.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. I think the reason why most economists view tariffs as being unhelpful is because of a quirk of the modeling methodology, where they basically assume that trade deficits, balance out to zero over the long term. But that really hasn't happened in recent decades. So clearly something is wrong with the assumptions underpinning these models. Indeed, if we review the history of tariffs, we see that in the 19th century, the average tariff rate on dutiable imports was in excess of 40% for most of the latter half of the 19th century, and the average tariff rate on all imports was in excess of 30%. Nevertheless, this was a period of extraordinary economic transformation in the Industrial Revolution. Even after World War II, the tariff rate on dutiable imports was in excess of 30%, again, a period of very strong economic growth. It wasn't until the 1970s until we really get to the period of very low tariffs beginning. And coincidentally, that coincided with the reduction in growth rates. Now, I don't want to claim that correlation is causation, but nevertheless, the historical record is very clear that the American economic story has seen periods of high tariff rates coincide with extraordinary economic success. So there's nothing in the historical record that would say that it's impossible to have a fabulous economy with high tariffs.
Those jobs were either going to go to China or the United States, because President Trump and these policies, they're coming to the United States. So it speaks for itself, and I'm very proud of that. Really quickly, Mr. Kessler, Communist China has built too many weapons using stolen American technology, and BIS oversees export controls, which are supposed to stop the PLA from getting its hands on sensitive technologies like bioweapons, ingredients, or cutting-edge chips. But career bureaucrats over the years at BIS have rubber-stamped deals for decades to send some of our most important technology to China. What can you do to stop that?
Well, thank you, Senator. I will not rubber stamp deals like that, and I will make sure that we scrutinize any request along those lines very carefully and make sure that every action that we take is consistent with our national security priorities.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you on that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Chair Scott and Ranking Member Warren, and thanks to all of our panelists for being here today. I appreciate that, and your families also, welcome. I'm going to start with Mr. McKernan and then get to Mr. Pulte if I have time. The Trump administration, Mr. McKernan, the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress have repeatedly attacked the CFPB and challenged, even undermined, its legitimacy, branding it as this rogue partisan agency that is out of control. President Trump and Republican colleagues, and I think even you, have said that the CFPB faces a crisis of legitimacy. And yet it seems to me that this crisis is caused by people all the way up to the president, undermining the legitimacy of the CFPB and then declaring that it's not legitimate. This is a bit to me like an arsonist starting a fire and then yelling fire. So, Mr. McKernan, you are in an unenviable position. You have been nominated to lead an agency that your bosses have said should be killed off. Elon Musk has been said that the CFPB should rest in peace. And I have to say, I listened to your responses to Senator Warner, and it also bothers me that you couldn't say straight up that returning $21 billion in money stolen from American consumers, you couldn't just say that that was a good thing. So I want to dive in on this a little bit. Do you think that requiring $80 million in illegal overdraft fees to be refunded to service members and veterans was a rogue action or a partisan action? That was something the CFPB accomplished.
Senator, I'm not sure which action you're pointing to there.
Well, the CFPB required $80 million in illegal overdraft fees to be refunded to service members and veterans.
If they were illegal overdraft fees, then certainly they needed to be refunded.
Yesterday, you and I spoke about Wells Fargo, one of the largest banks in the world. The CFPB required them to compensate consumers for the harm they incurred when their houses had been foreclosed on and vehicles repossessed through no fault of their own. Is that a rogue action or a partisan action, do you think?
If there was illegal conduct there, then certainly the enforcement action is supported. I just don't know the facts of that case.
So you can't say that you trust that the CFPB had the correct finding there?
On that particular case, I've not looked at both sides of it.
Okay. When we spoke yesterday, you told me, I asked about the many lawsuits that are pending before the CFPB and what you thought would happen to them. And you assured me that you would review these lawsuits. We are just learning during this hearing that the CFPB just dropped a bunch of lawsuits, including the one against Capital One, which was for ripping off consumers to the tune of $2 billion by steering consumers, their customers, to lower interest-bearing accounts. So during this hearing, I guess Elon Musk or Russell Vought or whoever is in charge is saying that they're going to drop these lawsuits. And how do you respond to this? I mean, this makes me question, like, who's really going to be in charge of the CFPB if this is what's happening while your nomination is being considered?
Sir, Senator, I'm not sure I understood the question.
My question is, who's going to be in charge here?
Senator, if I'm confirmed, I'm the director.
Well, it's not clear to me, because at the moment that we're sitting here talking about you taking on this responsibility, Russell Vought or others are dismissing lawsuits that you just told me you were going to have the opportunity to review before they were dismissed. Mr. Pulte, I want to follow up on a conversation that you and I had about the rising cost of housing, something that I appreciated our conversation. A big driver of this rising cost is the cost of insurance caused by extreme weather events, all these terrible storms. In Minnesota, working families are struggling to manage almost a 40% increase in home insurance rates. And Minnesota is pretty lucky compared to other states like California and Florida, where hundreds of thousands of homeowners have been dropped from their insurance. So I want to ask you, I think this is putting a huge financial risk on families. Could you talk to me a bit about how you think the rising cost of home insurance and the lack of insurance availability, what impact that has on affordability?
Thank you very much, Senator. It's a great question. In the state of Minnesota, we have mutual friends, and our family's legacy business has done a lot of work in Minnesota over the years, and you guys have really done a lot of good things in Minnesota as it relates to affordable housing. With regard to your question on insurance, the FHFA is somewhat limited in terms of its jurisdiction. I will just make a general comment, however, that the cost of insurance is insane in this country. And to the extent that FHFA can play any part in thoughtfully reducing insurance costs, which I'm not so sure it's totally within our jurisdiction.